The office had always been a sterile, efficient place. The glow of soft, artificial lighting reflected off sleek metal surfaces, and the faint hum of the filtration systems created a backdrop of white noise. The constant bustle of human and alien workers crossing paths, exchanging curt nods or brief acknowledgments, was as regular as clockwork. For Ethan, it was comforting. He liked the predictability, the order of things. That was until Zara started acting differently. It began subtly, in a way that could have easily been missed if he hadn't worked so closely with her for years. Zara, his Draxilian coworker, had always been a model of professionalism, stoic, meticulous, and laser-focused on the tasks at hand. Their work relationship was built on mutual respect. They didn't linger on personal topics, didn't share unnecessary details. They had a job to do, and they did it well together. But now something was off. It was the little things. The way her gaze seemed to linger a second longer than it should have when they exchanged glances during a meeting. The way she stood just a bit closer when they reviewed holographic models of their latest research. The slight, almost imperceptible changes in her tone when she spoke to him, softer than before, warmer. At first, Ethan dismissed it as a byproduct of stress. Their current project was a high-stakes 1 month of research and development were coming to a head, and the pressure to succeed was immense. Everyone was feeling it, surely Zara was too. But then there was the touch. One late evening the lab was nearly empty, and they were both running simulations for the project. He was standing beside her at the console when her hand brushed against his. It wasn't intentional, he thought. It couldn't have been. Zara was always so precise, so controlled. But when he glanced over at her, expecting to find the usual cool indifference, she met his eyes with an expression he didn't recognize, soft, almost expectant. It was a fleeting moment, but it stuck with him. The warmth of her skin lingered on his, even after she moved her hand away. That night, Ethan lay awake in his apartment, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had passed between them, unspoken but palpable. Still, it was ridiculous to think that Zara, of all people, of all species, would suddenly be interested in something more than work. Draxilian culture was elusive, especially when it came to personal matters. They were known for their emotional restraint, valuing logic and efficiency above all else. That's why Zara had fit so well into the team, why they had worked so seamlessly together for so long. He had no reason to think that anything had changed. Until the next day. Zara's voice cut through his focus as he worked at his terminal. He turned in his chair to see her standing in the doorway of his office, her usually neutral expression carrying something different. She stepped inside without waiting for his response, closing the door behind her. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice lower than usual. There was a strange energy to her now, something both calm and intense at once. Ethan nodded, trying to keep his face neutral despite the rising tension in his chest. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Zara approached his desk, and for the first time in the years he'd known her, she seemed almost hesitant. Her tall, lithe frame, normally commanding in presence, was slightly softened as she moved closer. She stopped just shy of his desk, her long fingers resting lightly on the surface, her gaze locked onto his. "It's my mating season," she said, without preamble. Ethan blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. He had to have misunderstood. "Your what?" "My mating season," she repeated, her eyes never leaving his. There was no awkwardness in her voice, no hesitation now, Draxilian directness. Zara had always been blunt, but this was something else entirely. "I'm sure you're aware that Draxilian females experience a heightened state during this time. It's a deeply important part of our biology and culture." He swallowed, feeling a sudden tightness in his throat. He had read about Draxilian mating seasons in one of the many cultural briefings provided to employees working in interspecies environments, but the details had always seemed so abstract, so far removed from his own experience. He had never considered how it might apply to someone he worked with, much less Zara. I didn't realize," Ethan stammered, feeling a flush of awkwardness wash over him. He didn't know where this was going, but the direction was already making his heart race. "How does this affect us?" Zara straightened slightly, her posture regaining some of its usual confidence, but her gaze remained unwavering. "During mating season, Draxilian females are driven to seek out a partner, someone they trust and respect. It's not just biological, it's emotional, spiritual. The bond that forms during this time is profound. She hesitated for the briefest moment before continuing. "I've chosen you, Ethan." The room seemed to close in around him. The air felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Zara, brilliant, composed, and often unreadable Zara, was standing in front of him, saying she had chosen him. Chosen him for what, exactly? A relationship? A lifelong bond? Was this about attraction, or was it something deeper, more fundamental? Zara, I don't know what to say," he finally managed, his mind spinning. He was flattered, certainly, but also utterly confused. "I had no idea you felt this way. I mean, we've always just been co-workers." Zara's expression softened slightly, a flicker of emotion crossing her otherwise calm features. "I understand that this may be difficult for you to process. Human emotions work differently from ours, and your cultural norms around relationships are not the same as mine." She paused, as if weighing her words carefully. "But I didn't want to proceed without being honest with you. For my kind, this is not a temporary phase. The bonds formed during mating season are lasting." Ethan felt his stomach twist. Lasting. This wasn't a fleeting attraction she was talking about. This was something permanent, something that would change everything. His thoughts raced. Could he do this? Could he really enter into a relationship with someone from a completely different species, someone whose customs and desires he barely understood? I don't know, Zara," he said quietly, trying to sort through the mess of thoughts and emotions clouding his mind. "This is a lot to take in. I respect you, I do, but I never thought about us in that way." Zara's eyes softened even more, and for a moment he saw something in them that he had never noticed before: vulnerability. "I understand, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't easy for me either. But I couldn't keep it from you any longer. I wanted you to know, and I wanted to give you the chance to consider it." She turned to leave, but then paused, her hand hovering just over the door panel. "I don't expect an answer right away. Take your time. But please, think about it." With that, she left the room, and Ethan was left alone with the deafening quiet of his thoughts. For the next few hours, he sat there, staring blankly at his screen, his work completely forgotten. His mind kept replaying Zara's words, trying to make sense of them. This wasn't just about physical attraction. Zara was offering something far deeper, something that could change both of their lives forever. But how could he navigate something like this? They were from two different worlds, literally. Their species, their cultures, their very biology was different, and yet there was something undeniable in the way Zara had spoken to him, something that stirred feelings he hadn't known he had. He needed to understand more. If he was going to make any kind of decision, he had to know what this all meant. What mating season truly entailed, what it would mean for him, for her, for them. The thought made his chest tighten. By the time he left the office that night, the sterile efficiency of the place felt almost oppressive. The space between him and Zara had shifted, and he knew that nothing would be the same again. The night after Zara's confession was a restless one. Ethan tossed and turned in his bed, the darkness around him doing nothing to still the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. Zara's words echoed endlessly, intertwining with the muted glow of city lights filtering through his apartment window. "I've chosen you, Ethan." The sentence held a weight that pressed down on him with every repetition. He couldn't shake the intensity of the moment, the look in her eyes, the gravity in her voice. His alarm clock blinked at him in the early morning hours, but sleep never came. It was as though his world had shifted overnight, and he now stood on unfamiliar ground. He wasn't sure what troubled him more, the sheer impossibility of Zara's proposition, or the fact that beneath all the confusion, there was a small, persistent part of him that was curious, intrigued even. By dawn, Ethan was no closer to an answer, but he knew one thing: if he was going to make any sense of this, he needed to understand. Zara had spoken of mating season as if it were something sacred, something far deeper than the physical attraction humans experienced. He had seen that vulnerability in her eyes when she explained it. This wasn't casual for her. This was serious, permanent. That morning he arrived at the office earlier than usual, the glow of the artificial lighting oddly soothing in its predictability. The steady hum of the building, the familiar scent of the sanitized air, all these things grounded him in a world he understood. But his thoughts were still elsewhere, on Zara, on her people, on the unfathomable differences between them. Ethan slid into his chair, the holographic display of his terminal blinking to life as he navigated through the company's internal database. The research firm had a robust archive of information about the species they worked with, cultural nuances, biological differences, everything a human needed to collaborate effectively. He hadn't thought much of it before, but now it felt like a lifeline, a guide to navigate the uncharted waters he found himself in. He typed in Draxilian mating customs and hit enter. Thousands of documents, reports, and studies materialized in front of him, suspended in midair. Ethan felt a surge of relief. There was so much he didn't know, but here was the chance to learn. He sifted through the information, scrolling past the basic biology sections he already knew about, diving straight into the cultural aspects. The bonding rituals of Draxilian mating seasons. The heading alone made his chest tighten. He clicked it, the document expanding in front of him. As he read, the world around him seemed to fall away. Draxilian mating seasons occur in cycles, triggered by biological and environmental factors unique to their species. But unlike many species that engage in temporary unions for reproduction, the Draxilian mating season is a deeply emotional and spiritual event. It is not merely about procreation, it is about forming a lifelong bond, one that transcends the physical and enters the realm of the mind and soul. For Draxilian females, choosing a mate is a process rooted in respect, admiration, and emotional resonance. It is said that a female will only choose a partner once in her lifetime, as the bonds created during this season are permanent. The union is not just physical but mental, often leading to a merging of consciousnesses, where the partners can share thoughts, emotions, and experiences at an unparalleled depth. The female initiates the bonding process by expressing her desire, a gesture that is both vulnerable and sacred. Once accepted, the bond is formed through both physical and spiritual rites, and it is considered dishonorable for a female's offer to be declined once made. The rejection could lead to deep emotional pain, as the female's mating drive is not purely biological, it is deeply intertwined with her emotional well-being. Once bonded, the pair is often inseparable, and the connection formed can influence every aspect of their lives, from their emotional states to their decision-making processes. It is a commitment that demands vulnerability, trust, and complete openness. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just read. A merging of consciousnesses, was that even possible? His own understanding of relationships, of emotional connections, suddenly felt small in comparison. This wasn't just about romance or attraction, it was about sharing yourself in a way he had never imagined. Zara's vulnerability now made perfect sense. The way she had looked at him, the intensity of her words, it wasn't just a declaration of attraction. It was an offering of something far deeper, a bond she considered unbreakable. The thought both fascinated and terrified him. How could he, a human, even begin to comprehend something like that? As Ethan continued reading, he discovered that the Draxilian bond had practical implications too. Partners were known to experience heightened empathy for one another, sometimes even sensing each other's emotions without speaking. Some accounts mention that bonded pairs could communicate telepathically, their thoughts seamlessly entwined during times of emotional intensity. This bond wasn't just emotional, it was physical, mental, spiritual. It was everything. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine what that would be like. To know someone, to feel someone so deeply, without the barriers that normally separated people. Could he even handle that kind of closeness? Did he want that? Ethan had always valued his independence, his personal space. The idea of being so intimately connected with someone, especially someone from a completely different species, felt both thrilling and suffocating at the same time. He realized that Zara wasn't just asking him for a relationship. She was asking him to share his soul. His head spun with the enormity of it all. He needed perspective. He needed to talk to someone who could help him understand. Pulling away from the terminal, Ethan exited his office and made his way through the corridors of the facility, his mind still swirling with questions. He passed by colleagues, humans and aliens alike, who seemed blissfully unaware of the inner turmoil consuming him. But one Draxilian elder in particular came to mind, Erez, one of the senior cultural advisors in the company. He had been working with the firm for decades, known for his wisdom and deep knowledge of Draxilian customs. If anyone could offer insight, it would be him. Ethan found Erez in his usual spot, the quiet, dimly lit meditation alcove near the eastern wing of the building. The elder was seated cross-legged on a raised platform, his reptilian skin catching the faint light as he meditated, his eyes closed in serene contemplation. Ethan hesitated, not wanting to interrupt, but the weight of his situation pressed him forward. "Erez," he said softly, standing just outside the alcove. "Do you have a moment?" Erez's eyes opened slowly, a serene smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "Ethan," he said, his voice smooth and melodic, of course. "Come, sit." Ethan sat down beside him, feeling strangely out of place in the calm atmosphere. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to begin, but Erez's patient gaze encouraged him to speak. I need to understand something," Ethan began, his voice uncertain. "About Draxilian mating seasons. About the bonds your people form." Erez's expression remained calm, but there was a knowing look in his eyes. "Ah," he said softly, "I see. You have been chosen." The simplicity of his statement took Ethan aback. It was as if Erez knew exactly what had transpired without needing any details. "Yes," Ethan admitted, "Zara. She chose me. But I don't understand what that really means. I've read about it, I've tried to understand, but it's overwhelming." Erez nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "It is overwhelming, especially for one who is not Draxilian. Our bonds are not like human relationships. They are not fleeting, nor are they driven by mere instinct. They are profound, lifelong. To be chosen by a Draxilian female during mating season is a great honor, but it is also a responsibility." Ethan felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. "But how can a human understand that kind of bond? I don't know if I'm even capable of something like that." Erez regarded him for a long moment before speaking again. "The bond between a Draxilian and their chosen mate is not something that can be fully understood through words or logic. It is a connection that transcends the mind and body. It is a blending of souls, but it is not something that can be forced or rushed if you do not feel ready. If you are uncertain, then it is important to acknowledge that." Ethan looked down at his hands, the enormity of it all still swirling inside him. "But if I reject her, it could hurt her deeply, couldn't it?" "Yes," Erez said softly. "A rejection during mating season can be very painful for a female. The bond she seeks is not just a desire, it is a need, deeply rooted in who she is. But it must be mutual. The bond can only form if both partners are willing. If you are unsure, it is better to be honest, rather than to force something you do not feel ready for." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want to hurt Zara, but how could he commit to something he didn't fully understand? Erez placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Take your time, Ethan. Reflect on what this means for both of you. If the bond is meant to be, you will find clarity. And if it is not, then you must trust that Zara will find her path." With those words, Erez rose gracefully from the platform, leaving Ethan to sit alone in the dim light of the alcove, his mind heavy with thought. He knew now, more than ever, that this decision would change everything for both of them. And the weight of it felt almost too much to bear. But one thing was clear: he could no longer avoid it. He had to decide. Ethan had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize. Work was work, and his personal life was neatly kept outside the office. It was part of what made him successful in the high-stakes world of interspecies research and development. But now, the lines between personal and professional were blurring faster than he could manage. It had been 3 days since his conversation with Erez, and Ethan had thought of little else. Zara's confession still weighed on his mind, her words echoing in every quiet moment. But now, on top of the personal confusion that swirled around him, their professional lives were about to collide in ways that he hadn't anticipated. The project. Their research was at a critical juncture. Months of work were culminating into something big, and they had been assigned the task of leading the final development phase. The company had entrusted them with the completion of a project that could potentially revolutionize how interspecies communications functioned, a universal translation device that could process emotional nuances, making communication between humans and aliens more intuitive than ever before. It was cutting edge, and the stakes were impossibly high. But every time Ethan looked at Zara now, his mind wasn't on the project. It was on her, on the weight of her request, on the connection she was offering him. And every time their eyes met, there was something unsaid lingering between them, something thick and heavy that made him both uneasy and deeply curious. The day started like any other. Zara was already at her workstation when Ethan arrived, her posture as straight as ever, her long fingers flying over the holographic interface with the kind of precision that made her an invaluable asset to the team. Her face was calm, professional, but there was something different about her energy today, something that only he could sense. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice more strained than he intended. Zara glanced up from her work, her sharp features softening at the sight of him. "Good morning, Ethan." He could hear the faintest shift in her tone, the warmth that was directed at him, and only him. His stomach tightened. He had spent the last few nights trying to decide what to do about her confession, but the more he thought about it, the more muddled his thoughts became. And now, with the weight of the project looming over them, he had no idea how to keep their personal and professional worlds separate. Zara's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary before she returned to her work. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the project. They had a deadline, and the CEO had made it clear that failure was not an option. "We need to run the final compatibility tests today," Zara said, her voice slipping back into its professional cadence. "If we don't iron out the remaining bugs in the translation algorithm, we won't be ready for the presentation next week." Ethan nodded, grateful for the temporary return to normalcy. Work, at least, was something he could control. "Right, I'll start on the acoustic calibration." The hours passed in relative silence, the lab filled with the soft hum of machinery and the occasional flicker of light from the holographic interfaces. But despite their focus, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Every movement Zara made, every subtle shift in her posture, seemed to carry a quiet intensity that only Ethan could feel. By mid-afternoon, the silence between them had grown too heavy. Ethan could feel it pressing down on him, making it harder and harder to concentrate. Finally, as he finished adjusting the calibration settings, he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Zara," he said, breaking the quiet, "we need to talk." She turned to him, her eyes instantly softening again. There was no mistaking the depth of her feelings for him. It was all there, written in the way she looked at him, as if she had already made up her mind and was simply waiting for him to catch up. "I know," she said quietly, stepping away from the console. She approached him, stopping just short of closing the distance between them. "You've been thinking about what I said?" "Of course I have," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could I not?" She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes searching his face for something. "And what have you decided?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair as he tried to find the words. "Zara, I care about you. I always have, but this is different. You're asking for something huge. Something I don't fully understand." Zara's expression softened even further, her voice gentle as she replied. "I know this is difficult for you, Ethan. I've spent years observing how humans navigate relationships. I understand that our ways are different, but I chose you because I see something in you. Something more than just professional respect. I feel a connection to you, and I believe you feel it too." Ethan swallowed hard. She was right, there was a connection, something that had always been there but had gone unnoticed, unspoken, until now. But the enormity of what she was offering still scared him. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. "I don't know if I can give you what you need." Zara's gaze remained steady, and she took a step closer. The air between them seemed to hum with a quiet energy. "I understand your hesitation," she said softly. "But I need you to understand that this isn't just about me. The bond I seek, it's not one-sided. It's not just my need, it's something we would share equally." Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. How could he explain the fear that gripped him? How could he make her understand the depth of his uncertainty without hurting her? Before he could respond, the door to the lab slid open, and they both turned to see Carla, a fellow human researcher, entering the room with a bundle of data pads in her arms. She smiled brightly, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Hey, you two," Carla said cheerfully. "I've got the latest data on the field tests. We're looking good for the final push." Ethan cleared his throat, quickly stepping away from Zara and turning back to his workstation. "Great, thanks, Carla." As Carla began updating the project's data, Ethan could feel Zara's gaze on him, but the moment between them had passed. Work, once again, had intruded on their personal lives, forcing them back into the roles of coworkers, teammates. But the tension was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of calculations, algorithms, and data analysis. Ethan threw himself into the work, grateful for the distraction, But every time Zara spoke, every time her fingers brushed against his as they passed data pads back and forth, he was reminded of the unresolved conversation hanging between them. As the evening approached, they were the last two in the lab. Carla and the other team members had gone home, leaving the space quiet and dimly lit. The translation device was nearly complete, just a few more tests, a few more tweaks, and it would be ready for the presentation. But the silence between them was too much to bear. Ethan finally set down his datapad and turned to Zara, his chest tight with emotion. "Zara, I don't want to hurt you." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment before it softened into something more vulnerable. "I know you don't," she said quietly, "but you need to be honest with yourself, Ethan. If you're not ready, then I need to know. I can't ask you to give me something you don't have." Her words were calm, but Ethan could hear the tremor of uncertainty beneath them. This wasn't just about him, it was about her too. The connection she sought wasn't just a biological imperative, it was something far more personal, more intimate than he had ever realized. "I'm trying to understand," he said, his voice strained. "But everything about this feels overwhelming. The idea of forming a bond that deep, I don't even know if humans are capable of it." Zara stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "You are capable of more than you realize, Ethan. I've seen it in you in the way you care, the way you connect with people. I wouldn't have chosen you if I didn't believe that." Ethan's heart ached with the weight of her words. She had so much faith in him, so much belief in something he wasn't even sure he could offer. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was a part of him that wanted to take the leap, to see what it would be like to form that kind of bond, to experience something so profound. But could he do it? Could he really let go of everything he thought he knew about relationships and take a chance on something so completely foreign, so utterly unknown? Zara's hand brushed against his, and the warmth of her touch sent a jolt of electricity through him. He could feel the pull between them, the connection that had always been there but had only now come to the surface. "I don't want to lose you," Ethan whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Zara's eyes softened, and she stepped even closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then don't." That night, as they stood alone in the dimly lit lab, Ethan made his choice. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he was truly ready for the kind of bond Zara was offering, but he couldn't deny the connection between them. The pull was too strong, too real. He took a deep breath, his hand finding hers. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice trembling. "But I want to try." Zara's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something deeper, something that made Ethan's heart race even faster. She stepped closer, her hand tightening around his. "Then we'll try," she whispered. In that moment, as the world outside the lab faded away, Ethan felt the weight of his decision settle over him. The lines between personal and professional had already blurred, but now they were completely erased. There was no going back. As they stood there, hand in hand, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The air between Ethan and Zara had become electric, charged with an energy that neither of them could continue ignoring. Every glance, every brush of their hands, every whispered conversation had built up to this moment, an unspoken tension that refused to be held back any longer. Ethan had agreed to try, to explore this bond Zara was offering, but neither of them had been truly prepared for the intensity of what came next. That evening, after the final test of the translation device, Ethan found himself standing with Zara outside the office complex. The sun had long since set, and the city skyline glimmered in the distance, lights twinkling against the dark horizon. They stood in silence for a few moments, the cool night air doing little to soothe the heat building inside him. "Do you want to come up?" Zara's voice broke the quiet, soft but laced with something deeper, something that resonated through Ethan's entire body. He turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about spending more time together, wasn't about continuing the conversation that had begun earlier. There was a new urgency between them, a need that had been growing stronger by the day, and Ethan could feel it pulling him toward her. He nodded, unable to trust his voice in that moment, and followed her inside. Zara's apartment was a reflection of her minimalist, orderly, with clean lines and a subdued color palette. It wasn't cluttered with decorations or sentimental items, just a few plants here and there, their alien leaves giving off a faint bioluminescent glow in the dimly lit space. The atmosphere was calm, but beneath it was a hum of something far more primal, something Ethan could feel in his bones. They stood there in her living room, facing each other. For the first time, Ethan noticed the way Zara's breathing had quickened, the subtle rise and fall of her chest betraying the same tension he was feeling. There was a vulnerability in her eyes now, an unguarded emotion that she hadn't shown him before. It was as though she was waiting for him to make the first move, to confirm that he was ready. "I've never felt like this before," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was thick with uncertainty, but there was no denying the truth in his words. This was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a mix of fear, desire, and something far deeper. Zara took a step toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "Neither have I," she whispered, and Ethan could hear the honesty in her voice. This wasn't just another phase of her mating season, this was real, for both of them. He closed the distance between them, his heart hammering in his chest. Slowly, almost tentatively, he reached out and touched her hand. The warmth of her skin against his sent a jolt of electricity through his body, and before he knew it, they were standing so close that he could feel the heat radiating from her. Her breath was shallow now, her dark eyes searching his face for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. Ethan knew, deep down, that this was the moment they had both been waiting for. Without another word, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but the moment their lips touched, something inside him shifted. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the silence of her apartment. Her kiss was different from anything he had known before. There was an intensity to it, a depth that made him feel as though she was reaching into the very core of him. Zara responded immediately, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, pulling him closer as their kiss deepened. Ethan felt the tension in his body unravel as he gave in to the moment, to the desire that had been building between them for days. His hands found her waist, and he could feel the warmth of her body through the fabric of her clothes, the softness of her skin under his fingertips. The kiss grew more urgent, more intense, as if all the emotions they had been holding back were finally being released. Zara's hands moved to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pressed herself against him, and Ethan could feel her heartbeat racing against his chest. The connection between them was undeniable now, the bond that had been forming in their minds spilling over into the physical world. Ethan pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. He needed to know that this was what she wanted, that she wasn't just acting out of instinct. Zara's gaze softened and she nodded, her hands still gripping the fabric of his shirt. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered, her voice low and filled with conviction. That was all the confirmation Ethan needed. They moved together toward the bedroom, their bodies guided by an unspoken urgency. The tension between them had reached a boiling point, and there was no holding back now. Once inside, the atmosphere shifted again, becoming something more intimate, more vulnerable. The soft light from the bioluminescent plants bathed the room in a faint, otherworldly glow, casting shadows that danced along the walls as they stood facing each other once again. Zara was the first to move. She reached for the hem of her tunic, and with a slow, deliberate motion, lifted it over her head, revealing the smooth, pale green skin beneath. Her movements were graceful, confident, but there was still a hint of vulnerability in the way she looked at him, as though she was offering a piece of herself she had never shown to anyone before. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he watched her, his eyes tracing the curves of her body, the way the faint light accentuated the sharp lines of her alien form. She was beautiful in a way that was entirely new to him, exotic. Yes, but also familiar in the way that her body responded to his gaze. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness coursing through him. She stepped closer to him, her hands finding the buttons of his shirt, and with a careful, almost reverent touch, she began to undo them one by one. Her fingers brushed against his skin as she worked, and each contact sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan felt himself trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet so certain that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Once his shirt was off, Zara placed her hands on his chest, her palms warm against his skin. She looked up at him, her eyes dark and filled with an emotion that he could only describe as awe. "I've never done this with a human before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled softly, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "Neither have I," he replied, and for the first time that night they both laughed, a quiet, shared moment of understanding between them. But the laughter quickly faded, replaced by something deeper, something that pulled them both back into the intensity of the moment. Zara's hand slid down his chest, her fingers tracing the lines of his muscles, as if memorizing every inch of him. Ethan responded in kind, his hands exploring the contours of her body, learning the texture of her skin, the way it felt smooth and cool under his touch. They moved together onto the bed, their bodies entwining in a slow, deliberate dance of discovery. Every touch, every kiss, every caress was charged with an energy that seemed to pulse between them, as if the bond they had been forming in their minds was now manifesting physically. Ethan could feel it, the connection Zara had spoken of, the merging of their emotions, their desires, their very souls. It was overwhelming, but in the most beautiful way. Their clothes were soon discarded, leaving them bare before each other, their bodies pressed together in a way that felt both natural and utterly new. The sensation of Zara's skin against his was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. There was a warmth to her, a subtle vibration that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Every movement, every touch, sent waves of pleasure coursing through him, and he could feel the same response in her, the way her body responded to his, as if they were perfectly in tune. When they finally came together, it was as though the world around them disappeared completely. There was no lab, no project, no colleagues or deadlines, just the two of them, locked in an intimate embrace that transcended anything Ethan had ever known. Their bodies moved in perfect rhythm, each touch a reflection of the bond they had been building for so long. Zara's breath was hot against his neck as she whispered his name, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan tightened his grip on her, pulling her closer as they moved together, their bodies becoming one. He could feel her, not just physically but emotionally, mentally. He could feel the depth of her connection to him, the way her thoughts seemed to blend with his, in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Time seemed to stretch and blur, the boundaries between their minds and bodies dissolving as they gave themselves fully to the moment. Ethan had never felt anything like it, this merging of consciousnesses, this complete surrender to the bond that Zara had spoken of. It was as though their very souls were intertwining, becoming something greater than either of them alone. And when the moment of release finally came, it was like nothing Ethan had ever experienced. A wave of pure, unfiltered emotion washed over him. The lab felt different the next day. It wasn't just the faint hum of machinery or the usual sterile smell of disinfectant in the air. It was the way the room seemed smaller, more intimate, despite its expansive, high-tech layout. Everything felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding the secret that Ethan and Zara now shared. The night before had been a turning point, an unspoken agreement between them, something more than just words or tentative touches. They hadn't crossed any explicit boundaries, not yet, but the depth of the connection they had acknowledged, the emotional charge that lingered between them, was undeniable. Ethan had taken a step into unfamiliar territory, a world he still didn't fully understand, but one that drew him in with a force he could no longer resist. As he sat at his workstation that morning, running the final simulations on the translation device, he kept replaying the quiet moments from the previous night over and over in his mind. The way Zara had looked at him, her eyes full of that same vulnerable intensity that had first shaken him to the core. The feel of her hand in his, warm and certain, even as his own trembled with uncertainty. He hadn't slept much. The weight of the decision he'd made had pressed on him long after he'd left the lab, long after he'd returned to the quiet solitude of his apartment. He kept asking himself the same questions. Was he really ready for this? Could he handle the depth of the bond that Zara wanted to form? What would it mean for him, for both of them, once they crossed that line? And then there was work. Their project, the one they were so close to completing, felt like a looming shadow over everything. They had come too far, worked too hard, to let personal feelings derail it now. But how could they maintain their professionalism when everything between them had changed? The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss, and Ethan's pulse quickened as Zara entered, her sleek figure silhouetted against the bright light of the corridor. She looked the same, calm, composed, her usual air of quiet confidence radiating from her, but there was something different in the way she moved, a subtle change in her posture, like a secret only they shared now. "Good morning," she said softly as she crossed the room, her voice carrying a warmth that wasn't lost on him. "Morning," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone casual, though he could feel the tension simmering just beneath his skin. They didn't need to say anything else. Their connection was unspoken now, a quiet understanding that hung in the air between them like an invisible thread. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. They worked in relative silence for the next few hours, both of them throwing themselves into the final tasks of the project with the same determination they had always shared. But the dynamic between them had shifted. It wasn't just professional anymore, and Ethan could feel the weight of that difference with every passing minute. As they reviewed the final calibration data, Zara's shoulder brushed against his an accidental touch, but it sent a jolt of awareness through him, a reminder of the growing bond between them. He glanced at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, the silent intensity between them flaring to life again. He looked away quickly, his heart racing, but the feeling lingered. By midday, the lab was bustling with other team members, humans and aliens alike, coming in and out as the final preparations for the project's presentation ramped up. The energy in the room was electric, but beneath the surface, there was a growing tension that Ethan couldn't ignore. Carla, their human colleague, was the first to notice. She had always been perceptive, with a keen eye for details others often missed. As she sat down beside Ethan to review some of the final presentation slides, she gave him a sideways glance, her brow furrowed in mild curiosity. "You and Zara seem different lately," Carla said, her voice casual, but the underlying curiosity was clear. "Everything okay?"
Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had been trying so hard to maintain his professionalism, to keep things from spilling over into their work, but Carla's observation sent a wave of panic through him. Were they being too obvious? Were others noticing the shift in their dynamic?
Different, Ethan echoed, forcing a laugh that sounded far more strained than he intended. "No, everything's fine. Just a lot of pressure with the project, you know." Carla's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she didn't quite believe him, but she didn't press the issue. "Right. Well, just make sure you both keep it together. We can't afford any distractions this close to the finish line." Ethan nodded, the pit in his stomach growing. He knew she was right, but keeping things professional was becoming harder by the minute. Especially with Zara so close, her presence a constant reminder of the personal shift between them. As the day wore on, the tension in the lab only grew. Colleagues were beginning to notice subtle changes in how he and Zara interacted, small things, like the way they stood a little too close when reviewing data, or the unspoken looks that passed between them when they thought no one was watching. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. By mid-afternoon, Ethan overheard snippets of conversation from some of the other researchers. A quiet murmur here, a hushed laugh there. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. He knew what they were talking about. In him and Zara. People were starting to speculate, and the thought of it made his skin crawl. Zara, as always, seemed unfazed. She went about her work with the same calm efficiency, her focus unbroken even as the subtle scrutiny from their colleagues increased. But Ethan could feel the pressure mounting. Every glance, every whispered conversation behind his back felt like a spotlight shining on them, magnifying the delicate situation he found himself in. The final meeting of the day was tense. Dr. Marlowe, their direct supervisor, had called the team together for a briefing on the upcoming presentation. The meeting room was filled with the usual crowd: Carla, Zara, Ethan, and a few other key team members, each of them seated around the large oval table with their data pads in front of them. Dr. Marlowe stood at the head of the table, his sharp gaze sweeping over the room as he laid out the final steps for their project's completion. His words were direct, efficient, but as he spoke, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Marlowe's eyes lingered on him and Zara a little too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to send a wave of anxiety rushing through Ethan's veins. "We're in the final stretch now," Marlowe said, his voice steady but firm. "I need all of you at the top of your game. This project is critical, and we cannot afford any distractions." The word distractions felt like a knife twisting in Ethan's gut. Was that directed at him? Was Marlowe aware of the whispers going around the lab? Did he know about the growing bond between him and Zara? Ethan risked a glance at Zara, but her face remained as composed as ever, her attention fully on Dr. Marlowe, as if nothing in the world could shake her. He envied her ability to remain so calm, so unbothered by the growing scrutiny around them. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan could barely keep himself from bolting out of the room. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. He needed space. He needed to clear his head. Later that evening, long after the rest of the team had left, Ethan remained in the lab, alone with his thoughts. The quiet was a welcome relief, but it did little to ease the storm raging inside him. His mind kept circling back to the same questions: what had he gotten himself into? How could he balance his growing connection with Zara while maintaining their professionalism? And most troubling of all, how could he protect their relationship from the prying eyes of their colleagues? He didn't hear Zara enter the lab until she was standing beside him, her presence as quiet and composed as ever. "You've been quiet today," she said softly, her voice breaking the stillness of the room. Ethan didn't look up from his workstation. It's been a lot." I know. Her voice was gentle, understanding. She reached out and touched his arm, the warmth of her fingers grounding him in the moment. "But you don't have to carry this alone, Ethan. We're in this together." He finally looked up at her, his heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid between them. "People are talking, Zara, they're noticing." "Us." Zara's eyes softened, and for a moment she looked almost sad. "Let them talk. What matters is what we share, not what they think." "But what if it affects the project?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "What if it gets in the way of everything we've worked for?" Zara was silent for a moment, her gaze steady on his. Then she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The project is important, Ethan. But so are we. We can't ignore what's happening between us, and we shouldn't have to." Her words struck something deep inside him, something he had been trying to avoid acknowledging. She was right. The bond they were forming wasn't something they could simply set aside, no matter how much pressure they were under at work. But it wasn't just about them anymore. Their colleagues were noticing. Dr. Marlowe was noticing. And the project, their careers were hanging in the balance. "I don't know how to do this," Ethan admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to balance it all." Zara's hand tightened on his arm, her gaze never wavering. "Then we'll figure it out together. We've come this far, haven't we?" Ethan nodded, though his heart was still heavy with doubt. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that they could navigate this delicate balance between their personal and professional lives. But the road ahead felt impossibly uncertain, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. As the evening wore on and the lab grew quieter, Ethan knew that the ripple effects of their connection were just beginning. The real challenges were still ahead, and with each passing day, the stakes would only grow higher. But for now, as Zara stood beside him, her touch warm and reassuring, he allowed himself a small sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Ethan woke in the quiet stillness of Zara's apartment, the faint glow of the bioluminescent plants casting soft shadows across the room. For a moment he didn't move, lying still in the bed, his mind swimming through the events of the previous night. The warmth of Zara's body beside him was both comforting and surreal, and as the memories came rushing back, her touch, their shared intimacy, the overwhelming sensation of connection, it was hard to reconcile the intensity of those moments with the stillness of the morning. His heart pounded slowly, the aftermath of their encounter still lingering in his chest. It wasn't just the physical act that had left him feeling this way, it was something deeper. The bond Zara had spoken of, the merging of their minds and souls, had become real in a way that Ethan hadn't anticipated. In those moments of intimacy, it had felt as though he wasn't just with her physically, but emotionally and mentally, as if they had become part of one another. And now, in the quiet light of dawn, that realization settled over him like a weight. This wasn't just about last night, this was about everything that came after. Ethan turned his head slightly to look at Zara, who lay curled beside him, her pale green skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She was still asleep, her breathing slow and even, her face peaceful. The vulnerability he had seen in her the night before was still there, even in her sleep. She had offered him something profound, something that had changed both of them, and now that they had crossed that line, there was no going back. His mind raced with questions. What did this mean for them? For their work? For their lives? Everything felt different now, as though the world had shifted beneath his feet, and he wasn't sure how to find his balance again. The idea of being so deeply connected to someone, especially someone from a different species, with different customs and expectations, was both exhilarating and terrifying. He gently pulled himself out of bed, careful not to disturb Zara, and padded softly across the room toward the window. The city outside was waking up, the lights of the buildings slowly dimming as the sun began to rise on the horizon. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring out at the skyline, lost in thought. He had made his choice. He had decided to try to see where this connection with Zara could take them, but now that they had crossed the threshold into something so intimate, the stakes felt higher than ever. He wasn't just navigating unfamiliar territory anymore, he was diving headfirst into the unknown, with no map, no guide, and no clear understanding of what the future would hold. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. The project, the one they had poured so much time and energy into, was still hanging in the balance, and now their personal relationship was intertwined with its success. How were they supposed to maintain their professional focus when their personal lives had become so deeply entangled? Would their colleagues notice? Would they care? Ethan's mind spun with the potential consequences, both personal and professional. The sound of movement behind him pulled him from his thoughts, and he turned to see Zara stirring in the bed, her dark eyes blinking open as she stretched lazily beneath the covers. She caught sight of him standing by the window and smiled, a soft, sleepy smile that sent a pang of emotion through him. "Good morning," she said, her voice husky with sleep. Ethan's heart skipped a beat at the sound of her voice, and he forced a smile in return. "Good morning." Zara pushed herself up on one elbow, her gaze lingering on him as if she could sense the shift in his mood. "Are you all right?" He hesitated, unsure of how to put his tangled thoughts into words. I'm just thinking about everything." She tilted her head slightly, her expression softening with understanding. "Last night was a lot." Ethan let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's one way to put it." Zara's smile faded slightly as she studied his face. "You're worried, aren't you?" "I don't know if worried is the right word," he admitted, turning back toward the window. "It's more like overwhelmed." There was a long silence between them before he heard the soft rustle of sheets as Zara climbed out of bed and crossed the room to stand beside him. She placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "I understand," she said quietly. "This is new for both of us." Ethan turned to look at her, his heart tightening in his chest. "What does this mean for us, Zara? I mean, after last night, we can't just go back to the way things were, can we?" Zara shook her head, her expression serious. "No, we can't. But I didn't expect us to. I knew that once we crossed that line, everything would change." "That's what scares me," Ethan confessed. "I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know what comes next." Zara's dark eyes softened, and she reached up to cup his face in her hands, her touch gentle and soothing. "We don't have to know everything right now. This is a journey, and we'll figure it out together." Ethan closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as he let her words wash over him. She was right, there was no roadmap for this, no way to predict how things would unfold. All they could do was move forward, one step at a time. But even as he tried to calm his racing thoughts, the reality of their situation continued to gnaw at him. The project presentation was in just a few days, and they were expected to deliver something groundbreaking, something that could change the way humans and aliens communicated forever. The success of that project wasn't just important for their careers, it was a turning point for interspecies collaboration. The pressure to succeed was immense. "We have to be careful," Zara, Ethan said, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "We can't let this affect the project." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know. The stakes are too high for us to lose focus." "But that's the problem," Ethan continued, his voice tense. "How do we stay focused when we're this?" Zara's lips curved into a small smile. "We're professionals, Ethan. We've worked together for years. We've always been able to compartmentalize, to focus on the task at hand. We can do that again." "Can we?" Ethan asked, his doubt clear in his voice. Zara stepped closer, her hand sliding down to rest on his chest. "Yes, we can. I trust you and I know you trust me. We'll find a way to balance this." Ethan searched her eyes, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that they could navigate this new reality without letting it jeopardize everything they had worked for. But the truth was, he wasn't sure if it was possible. The next few days passed in a blur of work and tension, the weight of the upcoming project presentation hanging over them like a storm cloud. Ethan and Zara worked side by side, their focus shifting between the project and the growing intensity of their relationship. There were moments when everything felt normal, when they fell back into their familiar rhythm of collaboration, but beneath the surface, the unspoken connection between them simmered, threatening to boil over at any moment. Their colleagues had started to notice the change, though no one had said anything outright. There were subtle glances, whispered conversations in the hallways, but nothing concrete enough to address directly. Ethan could feel the pressure building, both from within and from the outside world. He and Zara were walking a tightrope, balancing their personal lives with their professional responsibilities, and one misstep could send everything crashing down. The night before the presentation, Ethan found himself pacing in his apartment, unable to shake the growing sense of unease. The project was ready, the translation device fully functional, but his mind was elsewhere on Zara, on the bond they had formed, on the future they were trying to build together.
What if they couldn't maintain the balance? What if their personal relationship got in the way of their professional success? The fear gnawed at him, eating away at his confidence.
A soft chime interrupted his thoughts, and he glanced at his communicator, surprised to see Zara's name flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey," he said, his voice tired. "Hey," Zara replied, her voice soft but steady. "I wanted to check in on you. How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, I feel nervous." Zara was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "I feel it too, but I believe in what we've created. This project, it's bigger than us, Ethan. And no matter what happens, I'm proud of what we've accomplished." Her words were meant to reassure him, but the weight of their reality still pressed down on him. "And what about us?" he asked quietly. "What happens to us after tomorrow?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Ethan could hear Zara's steady breathing as she considered her response. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we'll figure it out. We've come this far, haven't we?" Ethan closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. She was right, they had come this far. They had built something together, something that was both beautiful and fragile, and no matter what happened tomorrow, they had to trust that they could navigate whatever came next. "I'll see you tomorrow," Zara said softly. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll see you tomorrow." The day of the presentation arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. The boardroom was filled with executives, high-ranking officials from various species, all waiting to see the fruits of Ethan and Zara's labor. The translation device sat in the center of the room, gleaming under the bright lights, a symbol of the countless hours of work they had poured into it. Ethan stood beside Zara, his heart pounding as they prepared to present their findings. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What if the device failed? What if the board wasn't impressed? What if their personal relationship had somehow tainted the integrity of their work? But as he glanced at Zara, standing tall and confident beside him, he felt a surge of calm wash over him. They had done this together. They had built something incredible, something that could change the way humans and aliens communicated forever. And no matter what happened, they had each other. Zara caught his gaze and smiled, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. The presentation went smoothly. They demonstrated the device's capabilities, showing how it could interpret not only spoken language but also emotional nuances, bridging the gap between species in a way that had never been done before. The board members were impressed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration as they listened to Ethan and Zara explain the technology. When it was over, the room erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. They had done it. The project was a success. But as the applause died down and the room began to empty, Ethan knew that the real challenge still lay ahead. The project had succeeded, but now he and Zara had to face the future together. As the last of the executives left the room, Zara turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "We did it," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with pride and relief. "Yeah, we did." They stood there in the empty boardroom for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened between them hanging in the air. There were no more deadlines, no more presentations, just the two of them, standing at the crossroads of their relationship. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara stepped closer to him, her dark eyes filled with the same vulnerability he had seen the night before. "We move forward," she said softly. "Together." And in that moment, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how uncertain the future was, he wanted to face it with Zara. The bond they had formed wasn't just something fleeting, it was real, and it was theirs. They had crossed the line between personal and professional, and now, standing together at the edge of the unknown, Ethan was ready to take the next step. With her. He